Hello and welcome to the sixth episode of the No Hand No Land Template Toolkit series. This week I'm going to be sort of rounding things off by looking at creature elements of the toolkit that you can utilise, and also looking at some other experiments you can do within the toolkit to do with both utility and the use of Infect. So if you remember from the original deck that I introduced back in the first series, it had this card in it, which was Knight of Stromgold. Has protection from white for a cost of 1 black, first strike until end of turn, and 2 black, +1/+0 until end of turn. And of course all of those abilities can be effectively stackable, in that, if you've got 4 black mana to expend on this, you can make it +2/+0 until end of turn, and that costs 2 black to cast. Just to bring your attention to something, there's also that particular card was from the core set. There also is another version, or a functionally similar version of this, Order of the Ebon Hand, which is also 2 black and has the same abilities, protection from white and the +1/+0 and the first strike. And this was printed in Fallen Empires, so basically same card, different name. So in terms of alternatives to Knight of Stromgold, so obviously what you're looking for is something that is fairly efficiently costed and has various pumpable abilities which you can use as the game progresses, and you get more and more of your land out. You're going to have lots of sort of free mana towards the mid and end game, and therefore you can obviously use this to pump up the amount of damage that you can do. So what we're looking for is some sort of alternatives here, and one thing here that you could use is Stillmoon Cavalier. So this uses hybrid mana, so it's sort of 1 and then white or black, white or black. So this will obviously work in a deck that contains black. It has protection from white and from black. It also has the ability whereby it gains flying until end of turn, in addition to the first strike and the +1/+0. So it's very similar to Knight of Stromgold, except that it's slightly more expensive and has an extra ability which allows you to pay mana to give it flying. And then another card I sort of wanted to just bring up in terms of looking at cards that are pumpable in some way. An alternative to going down the route of using mana is using a card which gets pumped through some other interaction, and this is an example that I thought of, which is Mirri the Cursed. This is 2 and 2 black, so much higher cost than the Knight of Stromgold, for a 3/2, but it has flying, first strike and haste, and it has this interesting ability on it. So when it does combat damage to a creature, it gets a +1/+1 counter, so obviously that pump +1/+1 stays on it, and you can accumulate that. So with this on the board, this makes it very tricky for the opponent in terms of they've got to decide what they're going to do. It gives them a lot to think about. So it's just another way of pumping up a creature using something other than spare mana. So I just thought something interesting to play around with. It's always interesting to sort of put stuff like that into a toolkit, just see how it interacts with the other cards. So these two here would be direct replacements for the Knight of Stromgold, and this would just give you something interesting to play around with. Then I thought about looking at other creature cards which I hadn't come up subsequently on other weeks, which interact with the land discard and also the hand disruption element of the deck. And there were three really that I thought of that I hadn't already talked about. One was Guilt Feeder. So this is a 0/4 for 3 and 2 black creature horror. It can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and or black creatures. And when it attacks and isn't blocked, the defending player loses 1 life for each card in his or her graveyard. So of course, if the purpose of this particular deck is to get your opponent to discard cards, then they're going to have a pretty full graveyard. So Guilt Feeder is obviously exploiting that position. That's one possibility. Then another card, and this does some similar things to other cards we looked at on previous episodes, is Chittering Rats. So when this comes into play, the target opponent puts a card from his or her hand on top of his or her library, and it's a 2/2 for 1 and 2 black. So it's messing about with their hand again. And then you've got Akai Blizzard Herder, which is Goblin Shaman, and this is 1 red for a 1/1. When it's put into the graveyard from play, each player sacrifices a land. So it's got this sort of ability to sack a land. Obviously, you're going to end up losing a land as well as your opponent. But again, it's another interesting sort of creature card that interacts with this whole, land disruption mechanism. So some more things to think about. And then finally, something that came up, I think, in one of probably the first post I did, sort of episode 1, when I first sort of looked at the original No Hand, No Land Red Black deck, was someone came up with the idea of introducing Infect. Now this is something that I'd also given some sort of thought to, but hadn't really explored it fully until the person very kindly sort of commented and included a deck list. And so with this, basically the creatures that they suggested were a Phyrexian Crusader, which is 1 and 2 black. So that has first strike protection from red and from white and Infect, and it's a 2/2. You've got Plague Stinger, which has flying, Infect, and that's a 1/1 for 1 and a black. And Ogre Menial, which is 3 and a red, has Infect. It's a 0/4, and for 1 red you can pump it and give it +1/+0 until end of turn. So obviously, with those creatures, you would be looking to swap them out with other parts of the deck that we've looked at on previous weeks. And if you want to check this out, then look back at the earlier episodes. Like I said, I think it's episode 1 or 2 where the comment actually lists that particular build with Infect in it. And then finally you have this Virulent Wound, which obviously exploits this Infect with its adding a bit of utility here by putting a -1/-1 counter on target creatures. When that creature is put into a graveyard this turn, its controller gets a poison counter. So that's something, again, to play around with if you're looking to deal damage mainly through Infect in this particular deck. And then finally, just a couple of utility cards. One is sort of a follow-on from last week when we were looking at direct damage, and I was sort of talking about Fireball and alternatives to Fireball, and his Devil's Play. So it's X colourless and red, and it deals X damage to a target creature or player. Not as flexible as a Fireball, but it does have this flashback on it. So later on in the game, it's obviously a slightly higher cost here than the original casting cost, but you can sort of play this again and do direct damage or damage both to either to a creature or a player using this card. And then finally, Sign in Blood here, just a very useful black card to use here. Target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. This is a very interesting card here because effectively you can play it on yourself if you're prepared to lose 2 life and use it to get card draw, or if your opponent is fairly close to 0 life, then you can use this to sort of finish them off. Also in a discard deck it's quite interesting because you can play this on your opponent. They lose 2 life, they draw 2 cards, and then they've got something in their hand to discard, because with any discard deck, as you get further into the game, your opponent is going to probably have less and less cards in their hand. So this is effectively restocking their hand, so you can then play a discard card and get them to discard more cards from their hand. Okay, so that about wraps it up for this episode. I'm going to probably do one more episode in a few weeks' time, and I'm just going to look at some builds using the toolkit. So anyway, thanks for watching. Bye for now.